This is a very unique episode. We are going to be talking about what our role is when parenting children who are college age. It's very different. What does parenting look like then? Shoshana Schechter, who has much experience with this age in her role as the Associate Dean of Torah Studies at Stern College for Women and the Director of the Mechina program, answers these questions and much more with fascinating stories, life perspective. It is incredible. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to let you know that this is going to be one of the last episodes of the Jews Next Door, as I'll be focusing on my role as principal. But I really love helping parents, and after getting many requests, I will be opening myself up to work with 3 additional families who are interested in parenting coaching. Feel free to reach out to me at yair.menshel@gmail.com. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Raising children in general is not easy. Throw in the desire to have passionate and committed Jews, now that's next level hard. My name is Rabbi Yair Menshel. As an educator, parent educator, and a parent of young children, I'm on the journey just like you to learn how we can best parent our children to take care of the whole child and each child and to help guide them in their journey of their relationship with HaShem. With weekly episodes answering your biggest parenting questions, you will gain the best practices you need to raise your children the way you want, to raise the Jews next door. This week's guest, we have the pleasure of hearing from Professor Shoshana Schechter. Mrs. Schechter is the Associate Dean of Torah and Spiritual Life at Stern College for Women and the founding director of the Mechina program there, which she founded 17 years ago to accommodate students who did not receive a formal Jewish education prior to their enrollment at Stern College. A graduate of Stern College herself with a Bachelor's of Science in both Judaic Studies and English Literature, Mrs. Schechter has also taught Tanakh and English at various high schools in the New York area. She holds a master's degrees from the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies and Columbia's University School of Journalism, which is very cool, very impressive. She's a frequent lecturer on topics in Tanakh and has been involved in Jewish outreach programs on 4 continents. She lives in New Hampshire, New York with her husband and 5 children. So first of all, really want to say a major thank you. I know you are extremely busy with doing so many amazing things and amazing work for Klal Yisrael.
It's my pleasure, Yara. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So first things first, what inspired you to go into education in the first place?
That is an excellent question. I was not always interested in Jewish education. And even when I graduated from college, I mean, the funny thing is that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but the one thing I thought I didn't want to do was go into Jewish education.
Really? That's so funny.
Hence my degree in journalism from Columbia.
Okay. That's funny.
So I had done a lot of informal Jewish education. I had done a lot of started involved in Kiruv programming.
Like what type of Kiruv programming?
So I guess, I'll start from the beginning. I guess my first experience in informal Jewish education, interestingly, was in high school. I went to the Frisch Yeshiva High School.
Oh, cool.
And I had the very unique opportunity to take a trip to the former Soviet Union during the communist era.
Wow.
So it was the end of communism. It was like a year before the Iron Curtain fell.
Wow.
And communism fell. And I was chosen to go on a trip. It was a really like a secret trip, kind of. We weren't allowed to tell anyone where we were going during winter break. It was my junior year in high school. And there was an organization called SSJ, Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry. And they decided, at that point, there were a lot of educators and rabbis going, kind of secretly to Russia, to communist Russia,
wow,
to teach, to educate Jews.
Sure.
In those days, Torah, the study of Torah was forbidden. And
totally. I had a brother who ran USSR and, going there. And he once came back with a Torah from there, rescued it.
Who's your brother who did USSR? I started USSR.
Oh, really? It's Menachem Menshel.
Oh, okay.
That's
funny. You know what USSR stands for?
Yeah.
It's actually not. It's
not
called, and I'll tell you how that started. I mean, again, we don't have hours here, but
sure.
It's Yeshiva and University Students for the Spiritual Revival of Soviet Jews.
Okay.
So I'll tell you how that started. It started with this trip that I did in high school. So there were a lot of rabbis, rabbinic figures and rabbis who went to, kind of in an underground way to teach Torah. And very often they looked very rabbinic. They looked Jewish. They would often be caught, and then the people that they were teaching would get in trouble, and they would be deported. And because you had the KGB, the secret police, and they would follow your activities. I know I'm talking like I was in a spy movie, but it's really incredible that it wasn't that long ago. I'm not that old. It's like, I'm a little older than you think I am, but I'm not that old. But and so Glenn Richter from this Triple SJ, the Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry, he was the head of the organization, and he came up with this idea that we should send high school students, because we didn't look particularly rabbinic. We didn't look particularly Jewish. And here we are during our winter break. We would spend, a week and a half during our winter break going and teaching Torah to refuseniks, to people who, I don't know if people know who refuseniks are, but I'm hoping people who are listening to this podcast do know that. But Jews in Russia who had, who wanted to leave and wanted to maintain their Jewish identity. And they asked to, they would apply to leave, for a visa to leave, and they would be denied, and they would be called refuseniks. Mm-hmm. And they were persecuted in so many different ways because of that. So we were sent, it was a group of us, there were 6 guys and 3 girls, and each of us went with a teacher, and we were sent to really teach Torah, to the Jews in the Soviet Union.
It's an amazing experience.
It was a life-altering experience. Yeah. And again, we weren't allowed to tell anyone where we were going. And, we were definitely followed at different points during the trip. And we had to bring in all sorts of religious items and tefillin and tzitzit and matzah even, because they couldn't get anything. And then we also brought things like, fancy cameras and, well, in those days, they were fancy cameras and, things that people can sell on the black market because, they were really poverty stricken because they lost their jobs as soon as they would apply to leave. Sure. Yeah. So the trip was life changing because it was the first time that I experienced real Mesirut Nefesh for Torah. I mean, it was unbelievable to see people who were just, would sacrificing everything to be able to learn something. And I was an 11th grader. Like, what did I have to give over? I remember being so nervous about it. And all our sperm, anything that we brought was taken at the airport. It was confiscated. It was thrown away. And what do I have to learn? I'm only, I'm a 16-year-old kid. And then, I realized that everything I knew, they didn't know. Wow. And I had this opportunity to learn. Like you come back with such an appreciation for learning and the fact that you can go walk into a yeshiva. And I had so many experiences, and one experience in particular, and this is going to tie into other things that I want to talk about education. I met a family named the Lifshitz family, Vladimir Lifshitz, who was he was teaching Torah secretly. Mm-hmm. He had a group once a week that came to learn Parsha with him secretly, and there was like a password that you had to say, to walk in. You had to say something like Shalom or Shema or something like that. And it was like a crazy thing. And also it's by the way, that
this wasn't even so long ago.
It wasn't. So that's what I'm saying. It wasn't even so long. People don't realize that. Like I tell my children this, and I tell my students just to appreciate, what we have and what people really went through. So we went to this shiur, and it was just the 3 girls. We were in our own group with our teacher. And we went to this shiur, this underground shiur. And again, there was like this shomer waiting outside to make sure that, nobody, the KGB wasn't coming in. And Vladimir Lifshitz was giving over this, to this shiur on the Parsha. If you can call it a shiur, it's whatever he knew. I probably knew more than him because, in my 11 years of education and Jewish education. And he was giving this shiur, and we were kind of participating and teaching a little bit. And we asked him afterwards, so tell us how this started. Like, who, this is, you get together every week. Did you ever get in trouble? Does this group come every week? Is it the same group? Do you get new people? We were asking him a lot of questions. And he said, well, actually, the reason that he's doing this is because the teacher before him was a guy named Alex Zelichonok. And Alex, one day, about 3 weeks earlier, was giving this weekly shiur, and the KGB came and raided, and they dragged him off to prison. No and he's like, so I was the next one. I was the one who asked all the questions. That's and I was like his best student. So I was the one who took over. And he said, you saw that guy in the front row who was, participating the most. He said, when I get arrested, then he's going to take over for me. Wow. And it was just like, you're looking at him. And I remember saying to him, like, Vladimir, like, why are you doing this? Right. What do you mean when you're going to get arrested? He said, because they know it's a game. We're doing this under the radar. They know that we're doing it under the radar. They give us a little time, and then they come and they raid. Wow. So I said to him, why are you doing this? Why you want to learn? So learn, by yourselves. He said, if we learn by ourselves, we're not going to learn. He said, we need each other to inspire us. So I said, but okay, so maybe like So don't do it. Like, why are you doing this if you know you're going to be in prison in a couple of weeks and each teacher gets imprisoned?
Right.
And he looked at us and he said, if we're not learning Torah, like, how are we going to have a relationship with HaShem in communist Russia? And if you talk about a moment,
that's deep.
I'm getting
really
emotional
deep.
just talking about
it's
it.
Incredible. I have the chills right now.
A few days after we came back, we heard he was arrested.
Oh, wow.
And then the next person took over. And actually, the year that I was in Israel for the year, I came back. That trip was the rest of 11th grade. Then I had 12th grade. Then I went to Israel for the year. And that year was when when communism fell. The Iron Curtain opened. And I spent a lot of time in the airport meeting people that were coming to Israel that I had met a year and a half before, including Vladimir Lifshitz.
No way.
So
that's
it was
cool.
It was an
crazy.
Incredibly meaningful part of my year in Israel also.
Yeah, that's a life-altering.
It's a life-altering experience because you come back. I went to Frisch. It was in Paramus. There were a lot of malls nearby. You don't cut a Chumash class after that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, not that I cut any Chumash classes, but like one day sale in Macy's, like it's a little bit, it's a Lifnei Iver
I got you.
issue going on over here. But when you come back and you see the Mesiras Nefesh for Torah, you take your learning much more seriously. And thank God I grew up in a home that was very Torah-dic.
Right.
And my parents valued Jewish education. But I tell my students all the time, because I have students, and we'll talk about that also. I have students that grew up without any Torah, without Shmiras HaMitzvos, coming from non-religious families, and they really take ownership of their Torah. But even if you grew up with it, you also have to take ownership of your Torah.
Right. I tell that to my students all the time. At a certain point, you have to decide for yourself. I mean, your parents raised you a certain way. You went to school a certain way. But at a certain point, you need to decide what is your Judaism going to be? What's your relationship with HaShem going to be? Because if 100%. You don't decide, then
it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And you're not going to have it, and you're not going to instill it in your children if you're only doing it because your parents wanted you to do it. So, and that's sometimes that's even harder. And that's why, I'm so inspired by my students who are taking ownership of it, making real decisions, take ownership of it. I always tell my students who grew up from that they also have to make decisions to take ownership of it. And this, I think that trip and those experiences and the Mamash Gedolim that I met and the Giburim, really, the people who really, I had never experienced real Mesirat Nefesh for Torah because our generation.
As a high schooler, you took that with such meaning. I feel like, I don't know if necessarily today's high schoolers would tap into that the same way. I mean, I'm sure they would. I
met really incredible people.
I'm sure that they would be moved by that, but in a certain way, I don't know. It's amazing that you did that.
I mean, it evolved over the years. Sure. It's not like I came back and I'm like, I'm going to teach Torah. I didn't because I wanted to. I worked as a journalist for a while, but I definitely, again, it was a process. It was an evolution, but it was definitely a trip that is really changing in that way. That you're like, okay, you start thinking about it. Like, look what people are giving up for Torah, so maybe there's more to this than just, my Chumash class that I have to take and have a test on. So that was taking ownership, of my Torah experience. Wow,
that's amazing. And who would you say are your role models? And I guess we'll start with Jewish education. We'll get to parenting soon.
Maybe we'll start with parenting.
Yeah, go, please, parenting.
So my parenting role models are really my parents. I don't know if everybody answers that question.
Most people do. It's interesting when others say not, but I'd love to hear why.
I'll tell you why. Because my parents, I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, and my parents encouraged me to do anything I wanted to do.
Wow.
And supported me through it. And yes, I went to Columbia Journalism School, and I haven't heard I haven't heard the last of it. That was a long time ago. And my parents still talk about, oh yeah, that year that we paid all this money and you're doing nothing with it now. But I was interested in it. So they encouraged me to do it.
That's
and
special.
They supported
really
me
nice.
in everything. I was a captain of the basketball team in my high school. During high school, I don't think my parents missed one game. So whatever it was, whether it was basketball or this trip to Russia was not lo pashut, so that you're going to communist Russia.
You weren't allowed to tell anyone. We
weren't allowed to tell anyone. My parents knew. We weren't allowed to tell anybody, but we also didn't have cell phones. I'm not that old. I was around during communist Russia, but the technology went really quickly. So we didn't have cell phones. I was literally out of touch with my parents for, I know it sounds funny, but like a week and a half or 2 weeks over winter break. Nowadays kids in Israel call every 5 minutes,
It's true.
So the downside of technology also, but you're in communist Russia, and I've done other things like that. Again, we don't have time to talk about all the other stuff, but some of the Kira programs at one point.
Episode two, we'll get there.
At one point when I was in college, long story, but I rented a boat to bring people to Israel from the Ukraine. And also my parents, I don't even think they knew. Well, I'll tell you that even before that, so this was my 11th grade, when I was in 11th grade. So when you have an experience like that, so what do you do that summer? You know, I had a summer, I had gone to Morisham my whole life. I was just, you know, we played La Via, they were our competition in sports down the street. But I couldn't just go back to Marsha. Like I couldn't just go back and be a counselor. Like I needed to do something. I had the fire under me. I needed to do something for the Jewish people, you know? Right. And yes, even though I was in high school, like that does impact you tremendously. For sure. So that year was Operation Moses. And that's when the Israeli government airlifted hundreds of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. And so that summer, I basically moved into a friend of mine that I had gone to Russia with from high school. So the two of us moved into. It's crazy when you think about it. I moved into an absorption center in Afula, and in a little suburb of Afula called Givat HaMoreh, and we just moved in and we ran programs to help acclimate these Ethiopian kids.
What does that mean? You just went and just hey, we're here.
Okay, well, there was a program called Achi and Tzchia. I don't know if you know. It was a program that was. In my day, it was towards the end of the program, you know, when I hit the scene over here. And it was a program that would bring seminary and yeshiva students throughout the year in Israel to development towns and run programs. Kind of what YU, Yeshiva University, does Counterpoint now. Right. And they bring them to development towns and they run programs. So they did this during the year and then they had a summer program. So my friend Tammy and I applied to the summer program. We kind of lied and said we were college students. I don't know who's listening to this podcast, but we weren't totally honest about how old we were. And we ended up going on this program. So it was a program initially, and then everyone dropped out. I guess all the yeshiva and seminary students were like, okay, we're out of here. We spent a year in Israel. We're tired of this. We want to go home. And it wasn't so organized. So we ended up, it was Tammy and myself in this apartment in Afula, you know, helping to acclimate the Ethiopian kids. So all these things.
Somehow got a boat while you were doing
No, that was later.
That was a different thing. Okay.
That was later. But my point was that all these experiences, I didn't have cell phones. You know, we're back to my parents. My parents just encouraged me to do these things. When I started USSR, that was, you know, because I had the fire under me from high school. And basically that was inspired because I felt that, you know, now that communism was over and the Iron Curtain was down and Russia or the former Soviet Union was now, you know, open to religion. You had all these Jews. The Jews that were committed and had strong Jewish identities and identified strongly as Jews, they all left and they came to Israel. And some of them came to America. And then you had all these people there who had no knowledge. I mean, interesting. You know, communism completely wiped out religion. And so that was my dream, to go back there to these cities in the former Soviet Union and teach these Jews who knew nothing about their Judaism because of all these years of communism. So that's why we started this USSR program. And then, you know, I did a few trips for USSR. And then at some point, I got frustrated with that because I felt like we were going, and I went to various places for different chagim. I spent a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur in Siberia. Maybe I'll come up at some point. And at some point I just said, we were going, and I felt like we were going to these places and we were giving them this amazing gift of Torah. And we were spending all this time unwrapping the gift and showing it to them and showing them how to use it. And then like a week later, we'd pack it up and bring it home. And then what? So the point, so I wanted to do something to kind of train young Jews in, you know, various places in the former Soviet Union, train them, teach them, learn with them to be able to kind of help them develop into leaders for their communities. And then they can go back and run programs year round. And it's not like we're coming so expensive, to send people back and forth. So I figured the best place to inspire, you know, young Jews from the former Soviet Union to do this is in Israel. So I needed to get these, you know, 25, 30 Russian young adults to Israel, and I had no money. So I couldn't fly them. So hence the boat. It was a 3-day trip from Odessa to Haifa. And it was very emotional coming into the Haifa port, seeing Haifa from a distance, like your ancestors did.
That's incredible.
I was a little too seasick to really appreciate it. But my point is that whether I was like renting a boat to go to Israel from Odessa, my parents were, and I wasn't in touch with them because I had no cell phone. So it was incredible. It really, you know, thinking back, like I wouldn't let my kids do it.
Right.
I did. At least I would make sure that they were calling me every 3 seconds. But the things that they gave me the opportunity to do is just, I'm so grateful for that. 1991 during the Gulf War, there were so many Jews leaving Israel because of all the threats to Israel. And I, organized a trip from Yeshiva University to fly into Israel, the day of the deadline for whatever. I'm not going into what happened during the Gulf War, but like even that, like, I remember almost begging them, like, tell me I can't go, because I was getting nervous and people were dropping out. I don't know. It was called Operation Torah Shield. You could go look it up if you want to see what it was about. But people were dropping out, saying my parents aren't letting me go. And I was getting nervous because it looked like there was going to be a war, and we didn't know if it was going to be biological warfare. That was the whole war with the gas masks. And at one point, I remember going into my parents' room and saying, just tell me I can't go. If you tell me I can't go, I won't go.
Right. You're like kind of hoping, like, just tell me.
So my mother said, Shoshana, you can't go. And my father said, I'm not. This is going to be your decision. Right. Like, if you decide, I'm not deciding you can't go.
It's incredible that they empowered you so much.
So they empowered me to be able to do, whether it was whatever I was doing for the Jewish community, whatever academically I was interested in,
That's incredible.
Pay to send me to Columbia School of Journalism when I didn't even end up being a journalist, but they encouraged me to do it because that's where my passion was going at that point. Right. And then when I told them that I really think I want to go into Jewish education.
Yeah, so how did you get there? What happened from doing all these amazing trips and having that experience of teaching Torah to then journalism that then got you to Jewish education and eventually now at Stern?
Right. So good question. So I had done a lot of teaching, a lot of informal teaching. Right. And even when I was at Stern, I was spending a lot of time doing informal Jewish education. I was doing a little bit of NCSY. I was spending summers in Australia, a couple summers, 3 summers in Australia doing a program called Counterpoint. Now Counterpoint, a little bit different, but we used to go to Melbourne and Sydney and Perth and run programs for, Jewish kids in some of the schools there, like the religious programming. And winters I spent in Winnipeg. There was a guy, Barry Bender, who had programs like a Counterpoint type program in Winnipeg in the winters. You have the shaykhs to Winnipeg. So I spent time actually in your grandparents' house in Winnipeg. And your grandfather was very involved in the school there.
Yeah. He was a principal.
I think I slept in your mother's room when I was there. But he was the principal there, and he was the one who brought us in for religious education. So I did a lot of that. And weekends I would go to college campuses for an organization called Kira with a capital K, and we'd run Shabbos programming. And But I never thought I was kind of fighting against going into Jewish education. And I feel bad saying this with all these educators, but I just felt like if you couldn't do anything else, you went into Jewish education. Mm-hmm. Anyone could be a teacher. Do you still feel that way now? Totally not. That's why I'm saying it. Like I just felt like, every Chaya Rifki who came out of seminary, goes into Jewish education and, teaches whatever, can teach Chumash in high school or college or elementary school. So I just felt like, I could do other things. I can go to medical school. I can go to journalism school. I could, why would I just become a teacher like everybody else out there? And of course I don't feel that now. I feel like, who do we want teaching our kids? Like, it's such an important, meaningful job. I can't imagine doing anything else. But again, I was kind of stuck in that mode. And also in high school, I was in a very intellectual class and very ambitious. And, people were encouraged to, why they're encouraged to go to medical school and law school and not Jewish education is beyond me. But I guess, I got that impression, again, not from my parents, just it was from myself and from my experiences that, if you couldn't do anything else, you became a teacher.
Right. Rabbi Ari Leibowitz had an amazing Sichas Musar earlier this year, specifically on that topic.
Really?
Like, people are going into always being spoken to go to the medical fields, go to dentist, law, all these, but we need amazing people in the field of Jewish education also. It's so important. And I mean, it's an amazing Sichas Musar.
Who do you want teaching your kids? You want to teach people who are passionate about it, not because they couldn't do anything else. 100%. So, and I think it's evolved. I mean, Jewish education, you have amazing people in Jewish education now who could have done anything else that they wanted to do. But that's kind of what I was pushing against. And of course, I was doing all this informal Kiruv and Jewish education, but I didn't think I wanted to make a career out of it. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And, I grew up, my father's an orthopedic surgeon. I thought I wanted to go into medicine at one point, but then I also saw how time consuming it is. I also wanted to be a hands-on mom. Not that he wasn't a hands-on father, but my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and it was, different. And then I was editor of the Observer, the Stern College newspaper, my senior year. And I really got into the journalism. And it also bothered me how Jews are portrayed in the media. I mean, now, don't get me started, but it was bad then also. Like, I have a lot to say, but we're not going there because then that's another whole podcast. So I figured, okay, maybe I'll just be a journalist. I mean, and when I finished Stern, I actually spent a couple years learning. Right now, I oversee the GPATS, the Graduate Program for Advanced Talmudic Studies. We have a Tanakh track and a Talmud track. I would have loved something like that. I didn't have that opportunity. So I went to Revel. I got a degree from Revel in medieval Jewish history. And then I learned a little bit, at a couple other places. But I just wanted to learn a little bit before I start my career, whatever that was going to be. So then I decided I really wanted to, and while I was learning, I was doing an internship at Jewish Telegraphic Agency, JTA, in journalism. And I really enjoyed it. I loved, the adrenaline rush from the deadline reporting. And I felt like it was important for an Orthodox Jew who has an appreciation for Torah to portray, Orthodox Judaism and Judaism Bechlal in a positive way, in a real way, in an authentic way. So I started applying for journalism schools. Now, so I applied to Columbia. Columbia is a 1-year program. The other programs that I applied to, NYU, Northwestern, was I think 2 or 3 years to get a master's. So while I was applying to journalism schools, one of my teachers, who was the acting principal of Frisch at the time, his name is Johnny Krug. He's also a psychologist. So he reached out to me and he said, listen, we have a teacher who's going out on medical leave from March until the end of the year, at the beginning of March to the end of the year. We need someone to cover the class. What are you up to these days? So I said, well, I'm actually learning. I'm applying. I was teaching English in Breuer's because I was interested. They needed somebody and someone told me about it and I loved it. And I loved that teaching. And I was applying to journalism schools. I was learning. So I was kind of, finishing up my MA. I think I'd finised that already. So I said, yeah, I'll take the class.
Right, I
had the flexibility.
Sure.
I was a big fan of Dr. Krug. So I took the job, really liked to be helpful to them. And it was just something nice to do. And I loved it. Yeah. I just loved it. I taught 11th and 12th graders Tanakh. And I just loved it. I loved every minute of it. I loved preparing. It made me learn. I was learning from them. I loved my students. I loved the preparation. I loved the teaching. I loved the growing that I was doing. And then I finished that gig. And, or even before I finished the gig, I guess it was working out well. So they asked me would I continue and teach the following year. And meanwhile, I had applied to journalism school, so I wasn't sure what to do. And of course, my parents were saying, whatever you want to do, work to us, And so then I decided, well, if I get into Columbia, I'll go to Columbia because it's only a 1-year program. I could do my master's in 1 year and then come back and teach at Frisch if I want. But if I don't get into Columbia, I don't want to commit 2 or 3 years to this. Maybe I'll just take the job. So I wasn't sure what I was hoping for at that point. Like I got my acceptance to Columbia and I was a little bit like, okay, great. I got accepted to Columbia, but I kind of wanted to take that job.
Right.
So I ended up going to Columbia and it was a year, it was a master's program. It was a 1-year master's program, crazy intense 1-year master's program. I was dating my husband at the time also. And so it was a lot going on that year. And then I finished and I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And all my friends I have friends in that program who are big journalists now. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And it was very hard. Everyone said you have to start out of town because there's very few jobs in New York. My husband had just started a 5-year doctoral program in psychology at Furkauf. So I knew I had to stay in the New York area. And I'm like, why am I looking for this job that's going to pay very little? That's going to bring me to, some place where I don't want to be when I love teaching.
Right. So then you went back to Frisch at that point?
So I didn't go back. Interestingly, I didn't go back. I almost did, but I ended up taking a job in a school in Muncie, which is funny. That's how I got to know Muncie. It was called Bat Torah. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a wonderful, wonderful school. And so.
Do you think, now that you're working at Stern, do you think that it's important for young adults to specifically attend Jewish college as opposed to going to, let's say, like a secular college and being involved in, any of the Jewish clubs, organizations there? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. It's a good question. Obviously, I know.
But it's
right. It's a very good question. But I do think for most people, yes.
Why? Why is that?
Why? Because first of all, I think college campuses now are complicated. Mm-hmm. And I think it's scary. Even for my own kids, like I was just happy that they all wanted to come to YU. We have something for everyone. This is not an ad for YU, but we have a very, very wide variety of students. And I know all of them because I work on both sides of it.
Right.
Exactly. So, I just think, I feel like go to a good I don't mean good graduate. I mean, graduate school is more important. And by the way, YU has great graduate schools also. But I'm saying, go anywhere for graduate school, but for undergrad, you want to be in a place that are aligned with your values. And there's so, to me, like between, the anti-Israel sentiment on campuses and the values and the mixed up values, I think it's a dangerous place during very formative years. And when you have a place like Yeshiva University, where, again, I'm sounding like an ad for YU, and I don't get a commission, by the way, if people come, but you have a top-notch secular education with incredible jobs and incredible acceptances to graduate schools. And at the same time, you can give up your learning, not just going to a shiur with the Jewish club, but in a serious way. I have a son who works in Amazon. He got a great job in Amazon right after he graduated from YU. Great. No, I don't have to pay his rent. There's no graduate school. And yes, people say, "Oh, you're so proud your son works in Amazon." I'm proud that he works in Amazon, but I'm more proud that he got a great job in Amazon and he learned till 2:30 in the afternoon every single day.
Right. Yeah.
And kept up his learning, has his chavrusa and had night seder, and for all my kids, my daughter, the same thing. She just started a 5-year program in Furkauf in psychology. We do have to pay her rent because she's in graduate school right now. But yes, I'm proud that she got into this great program, but she learned incredibly well, during her college years. So that's amazing. Me,
that's special.
Especially if you have the whole gamut. It's not like we're only catering to one, type of person.
So you mentioned that you're involved with the G Path, but you also, as we mentioned before, you founded the Mechina program. What was your vision when you were starting that? I guess maybe it sounds like it probably a little bit came from your experience. With,
exactly. So I was saying when I was in college, I was running around doing cure programs all over the world. And it happens to be, it was a friend of mine, somebody that I met because I told you I worked in the Observer. I was editor of the Observer. So my associate editor was a girl who came from Omaha, and she came from public school. And her experience at Stern was very different than mine. I had gone through the system. I went to Yeshiva High School, went to Marsha, I went to the camps, I did HASC, I did the seminary. Like, you come with a chevra, and if you don't, whatever your chevra introduces you to another chevra, like you all know each other because there's a network, and this girl knew nobody. And I could not get over that she came to Stern not knowing anybody. And it was hard for her, and she was floundering, and it was a very, very different experience. And I'm like, what do you mean there's no program or anything? Like, YU always had what's called the JSS program, which was a program for guys coming from non-formal Jewish educational backgrounds. And you have like big rabbis who came out of JSS, very inspiring program. And I never realized that they didn't have a program like that in Stern. And I couldn't understand that they didn't. Like, what? There's no Miskeret? Like, there's no program? Yeah, they had like beginner classes, but they weren't so good. And they weren't so inspiring. And just her experiences compared to mine were totally different. And we started learning together. And at that point, when I was editor of the paper and I had to write an editorial, every editorial I came back to, I somehow connected it to, we need to have some sort of, Mechina program.
So you're always like gunning for that.
I was always gunning. So then when soon after I graduated, soon after I did my degree in journalism, and I did my stint as a journalist. And then I guess at that point I was teaching in high school, and Rabbi Kannerfogel, who was the head of Jewish studies in Stern, I had a relationship with him. I majored in him. I took every class with him. So I don't know how it happened. I think he reached out to me. He said, we have higher enrollment this semester. We need an adjunct. We need one more class. Can you teach a Tanakh class? So I said, sure, I would. I loved Stern. And by the way, I almost didn't go to Stern because coming from Frisch in those days, they really pushed you to go to secular colleges. And I was really had enrolled in Columbia actually. And then I decided to come to Stern because I really wanted to learn. And I know people say, oh, you flipped out in Israel. No, it's from going into Israel. I did not flip out. I just gained a greater appreciation.
Torah in 11th grade.
Right. I'm like, I took this trip to Russia. I saw Mesiras Nefesh for Torah. And why wouldn't I go to the school, to the college that I'm going to be able to maximize my personal spiritual and religious growth and my connection to Torah? So I ended up going to Stern. And so I jumped at the opportunity to come back and teach. And so I started teaching, and then I was teaching advanced level classes. And then 2 years after I started teaching advanced level classes, Rabbi Kannerfogel asked me to teach a beginner class because they had this beginner teacher that I think was retiring. So I said, sure. I said, I don't want to give up the advanced ones. I'll do one advanced and one beginner. And I did that beginner class. There were like maybe 7 girls in that class. And I was blown away by them. And everyone had a reason that they came.
Blown away, meaning by how?
By how I was so inspired by them, blown away in a positive way that they took the road less traveled to come to Stern. They knew nobody. It wasn't like, it wasn't the natural.
How did you end up here?
Each one had a story. Every single one of my students has a story. And thank God I've had hundreds of Mechina students and they each have a story.
Yeah. Cool.
And I just,
write a book about all those stories.
I know. One day I'll sit and write. So I went to Rabbi Kanafogel. And I got to know them. I was very close with them. One of them I'm still very much in touch with. And from that class of maybe 6 or 7. And I couldn't get over that. There's no Misgaret. Again, don't have a program. They just have classes, but there was no Shabbatons. There was no one looking out for them. There was no community that they felt a part of, and they didn't feel part of the community. They didn't really feel a sense of belonging. I know we have other things. Right. Anyway, so I kept bugging Rabbi Kanafogel about it. Like, we got to do something for them. The boys have JSS. We need something for them. And then I think what happened was Richard Joel came as the president to become president of YU. And I think what happened was, I have tremendous hakar tov to President Joel because he really put me in this position. Rabbi Berman put me in the position I have now, but Richard Joel put me, 2 different presidents. But I think he probably came in from Hillel. His passion was Kiruv and Jewish outreach. And he probably said something along the lines of, why do we have nothing for the women we have for the men? And Rabbi Kanafogel probably said something like, I have someone who's been bugging me about this for years. And so I was hired to start this program.
Incredible. And when you first started, Dean Bacon said that the whole vision, I guess, for the role was to make sure that the extracurricular programming and the learning was, in sync. So how did you do that? Like, what was your methodology to make sure that was happening? Like, what?
So in my new capacity now, you're saying as Associate Dean of Torah, meaning Mechina, I was doing my own thing in Mechina, but as Associate Dean. So basically, there's a lot of ways to learn at Stern. There's a lot of great opportunities for learning. Unlike the guys who have a structure where they have shir in the morning and then they have their academic classes in the afternoon, and they do have academic Jewish studies as well. They'll have their Bible, academic Talmud, whatever other classes, in their academic Jewish studies. It's different than their learning in the morning. So on the Barron campus for the women, our learning is our academic classes. So sometimes it works. I mean, it's great and the classes are wonderful and they're inspiring, but sometimes, you want opportunities to be able to learn, not just in an academic setting where you're having a paper and a midterm and a final. Torah Lishma, exactly. Yeah. So, and we have a beautiful Beit Midrash, and which they did not have in my day. That was built more recently. So my job is to oversee the academic Jewish studies, but also bridge it with the non-academic Jewish studies, i.e. the learning. So every night we have shiurim in the base medrash. We have Monday nights with the Rosh Yeshiva. I want my students on the Barron campus to feel like they have Rosh Yeshiva also. We had a Q&A with Rav Schechter like 2 weeks ago. The base medrash was packed at 9:00 at night. An incredible opportunity. So we have the Rosh Yeshiva coming. We have every Wednesday, we have a club hour. So usually people use it to have lunch or their clubs can meet. We have a club hour share every week. And we have Shabbos programming. Like when I was in my day in Stern, no one really stayed for Shabbos. If you didn't have anywhere to go, you stayed for Shabbos. And now we have this, robust Shabbos programming. We have an incredible Rav and Rebbetzin, Rav Jacob and Penina Bernstein.
Sure, I know Jacob well.
I mean, they're incredible, and they've really changed the whole culture. And they started this, and I came in and helped continue building it. It's like a thing to stay for Shabbos now. Like if you want to stay for Shabbos, with Shabbos guests, it's inspiring. It's like a Shabbaton every week.
That's awesome.
So that's just trying to bring more learning opportunities to help all types of students and all types of learning opportunities for all types of students to maximize their personal, spiritual, and religious growth.
Sure. So another interesting thing I saw that when I was doing some research on you is I saw there's this amazing article in the commentator, and one of the things that you had said in the article was that relationships with students for you begin with Torah. Begin with the learning. So how do you foster that relationship through learning? And I guess slightly to shift it more maybe towards parenting at this point is, what about relationships with children? Where do those begin? Right.
So first of all, parents and teachers are very similar.
Sure.
And that's why, when you teach.
That's what we're all about.
Right. I mean, this is why you're doing that. Right? I don't have to tell you that. When you're teaching, and that's why your students are like your kids.
Right.
And you're teaching your friends' kids. It's like you're their parent also. So, so parenting and teaching I love that you have this podcast to talk about the intersection of the two because they're very connected. So it's all about relationships. And I'm sure I'm not the first person who's saying this and not the last. It's all about the relationship. Everyone's looking to connect. That's what I think we need more of. What I didn't answer, and we didn't come back to that question, was who's my role model in education? And the answer is, when you started asking me, when I was thinking we're going to do this podcast and I started thinking about this, I feel bad saying this. I really didn't have real connections with teachers. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of skills. I had excellent teachers. I don't really feel, and I don't mean to put anybody down. It was a different sort of environment and a different sort of educational environment. It's in a good way, for sure. We have ways to go still, but we'll talk about that. But I thinking back, I really didn't have those like I didn't have the relationship that I have with my students and that I see, students have with their teachers. And, I hate to say this, but most of I was in the top share in my high school, and most of my class is probably not connected to Torah mitzvahs today. Right. And I think that's wonderful people, but we're not inspired in a way that was lasting. And I think that
I think that there's a major flaw going on in our education system, and sounds like what you're saying back then, but I think even now, and it's interesting. Right. I mean, part of it is the relationships, but there's a lot going on. I mean, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. I was like, what can we do to fix that? Especially now that, interesting, you see students as they come to college. So you've seen them after they've gone through the whole entire system. Sometimes not with the Mechina program, but the other students who you're seeing who are coming through the whole system. There's a lot that's lacking.
And very often they get turned on by the year in Israel.
Right. So
what are we doing?
Right. So
after 12 years, we need that 1 year in Israel. I mean, I understand Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, and it's a powerful experience, but there's some disconnect.
What are your thoughts? What constructive criticism do you have for the day school educators?
I mean, there's wonderful people in Jewish education. I just want to start saying that.
There are,
and I don't mean to be critical, and I think we're doing amazing things. I mentioned the high school that I went to. It's a totally different place now. I actually bumped into a friend of mine who I went to high school with, and we got into a whole conversation, and she said, she left high school. She wasn't, I don't know what I think she wasn't religious for a while, and she did not feel very connected to Torah. And now she sends her kids to Frisch. Yeah. And she said, it's unbelievable how connecting it is. Yeah. And I said, well, what's the difference? Like, we went there and you didn't feel connected. You went there, you didn't feel connected, but your kids are. And she said, Sharia. Yeah. And it's interesting.
No, Sharia is very powerful.
But it's that experience. It's like, it has soul. Like, we need more the experiential part. We need to, I heard Moshe Weinberger say this once. I spoke somewhere where he was speaking. He said, we talk a lot about the concept of God, but that's not a relationship. Mm-hmm. I think we need to talk about the relationships more. He said, we talk a lot about the concept of God. He said, when's the last time you met somebody who has grandchildren who talked about the concept of grandchildren? Mm-hmm. Meaning,
interesting.
So, I think we're afraid sometimes, to talk about, like a relationship with HaShem. I don't think we talk about HaShem enough. And I think that there's this fear like, oh, it's going to be fluffy. It's not intellectual enough. I think about this a lot when I'm teaching. The Parshan who was the first person really to bring us more connected Torah, and the king of biblical analysis is Rashi. Rashi teaches values. Right. Think about all the Rashis that we learn values from, it's amazing. Basic values. Yeah. And then I think also, I once taught a course on introductions of commentators to Tanakh. And it bothered me so much when I was preparing for this class, like why Rashi doesn't have an introduction, right? Rashi doesn't have an introduction. I mean, he has a very specific methodology, and at different points in Rashi, in Tanakh, in Chamisha Chamisha Torah, he'll tell us, "Oh, I'm going to stick to the pshat, and I'm not going to," or Ein Mukdam Murchar B'Torah, or there's not necessarily chronological order in the Torah, or whatever. He'll tell us his methodology, but you would think that if he was one of the first people doing this, he would, like the Ramban has a whole
the
beautiful
Ramban
introduction, and the Nitziv, everybody, and Nitziv's introductions are beautiful.
Amazing, yeah.
But, and by the way, in terms of role models of educators, when I learned in Mechila for the year, Rav Cooperman really opened my eyes to Tanakh. Really, really in a profound way. And I teach a lot. I teach Sefer Breshit. A lot of what I teach is coming from him. And certainly the introduction of the Nitziv to Sefer Breshit, which we could talk about because that's another thing that touches. But anyway, so it bothered me that Rashi didn't have an intro to Torah of all these Mefarshim. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really think Rashi does. Because if you look, I'm not going to go through it. I'm not going to do the whole shir now. But if you look at the first Rashi, I'm giving everybody homework. Look at the first Rashi of every Sefer. Don't take my word for it. Look at the first Rashi of every Sefer. Sometimes we're so stuck in looking at it in a vacuum. We're teaching Bamidbar, so we start with the first Rashi. If you look at the first Rashi of every one of Chamisha Chomshei Torah, it's the same theme. It all has to do with the relationship between Hashem and Bnei Israel. Like, why does the Torah start with creation of the world? Because he's protecting them from being accused of stealing. Why does Shemot start last week's Parsha with the counting? We know who came down because Hashem loves them, so he keeps counting them. Why Vayikra? Because he's look at what he's saying, and then Bamidbar again because he loves them and he's counting them, and Dvarim he's hinting at things because he's protecting Kvod Anshel Yisrael. So all 5 Rashis.
That's fascinating.
It's fascinating, and it's not a coincidence.
So interesting. Yeah,
it's not a coincidence, and I believe with all my heart that is Rashi's introduction to Torah. That I feel like Rashi's message does is. I'll tell you my methodology later. My methodology will come up when it comes up. I'll tell you what I think and how to do biblical analysis, and it should be an intellectually inspiring experience learning.
But Hashem loves us.
But the first and foremost, Hashem loves us. Right. And why are we doing this? Why are we all doing this? And I'll share one last thing with you. I don't know if we're running out of time. But one last thing, when I tell my students, when I start, especially my Mechina students, and they've never done Parshanut, and I'm explaining to them what we do and what it means and how we analyze and how every word is important. And I tell them, and they'll say to me like, "Oh, Mrs. Schechter, why do we need to know 50,000 reasons for this word or this word or the explanations of this word and why this is referenced there? And just tell us what it means." I'm like, it's a process. So I always explain to them, I said, it's like, let's say you get a text from a guy that you're really interested in, and he texts you like, "Hey, Amy, I'd love to hang out with you soon. Smiley face emoji, Josh." What do you do with that text? Right? What do you do with it? You show it to your 5,000 closest friends and you're like, what does that mean? Yeah. He said, hey. He didn't say dear. Why did he say hey? What do you mean I'd love to hang out? He didn't say like. He said love. What is hang out? Is hang out just with me? Is hang out from the whole chevra? Is hang out? What do you mean soon? Is soon like, yeah, in a few months we'll get together. Is soon like right now in 10 minutes? Is soon like next week sometime? What do you mean smiley face emoji? The smiley face is a big smile. There's no hearts in the eyes. There's no teeth showing. Like, what does this mean? And why are you analyzing this? Because you care about the relationship. If you couldn't give a darn about this guy, like you wouldn't even care about it. Isn't it great, mashal? Wow. So like that's why we do this. Why are we analyzing every single word? Why do we care what soon? What does machar mean? Machar now, tomorrow? Machar acharit hayamim? Like what do we care about every single word? Because we care about the relationship. Because this was written by Kadosh Baruch Hu. Like we don't talk about, we don't experience the relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we're teaching. And that's something that I think we need to do more. And I think people are afraid. People are afraid to use the word spirituality because, it means fluffy. We're not intellectual enough. You have a whole, study of psychology, which is the study of emotions, and it's very intellectual. Totally. I think we have to find that balance better. We have to not shy away.
What does that look like practically in schools?
Practically, understand why you're learning this. Make it applicable. I actually brought, I'm not even looking at my notes, but I actually brought okay. Well, first of all, I brought a couple examples of questions that I've asked on not in college, but in high school when I taught in high school, how to make things applicable. And I know teachers think about this a lot, but I think, like for example, one of my questions here is psychologists assert that self-esteem is the key to a person's success. What advice does Hashem give us from the creation of man and woman in the early stories of Breshit that can help us develop our self-esteem? Or imagine you were writing a parenting column for a popular Jewish magazine. You're responding to a letter that a parent wrote about the challenge for her teenage daughter to maintain her spirituality in a physical world. How would you respond using 2 stories from Breshit that we've learned? Be sure to include the Barbanel's perspective of the stories, etc. Right. Or, imagine you are a shadchan and you're presenting a talk, getting the message across that Torah is the secret to a meaningful experience, to a meaningful life, and that it comes from our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That at the end of the day, this is why we're learning. Right. Because in order to infuse meaning into our lives, and everybody in this world, especially the more technology there is in this world, the more people are looking for meaning and looking for meaningful existence. And I feel like in Dvarim, when Moshe says, Ma Hashem lokacha shoel mimcha, right? What does Hashem ask of you? Only to follow Torah mitzvahs, dedicate your life 24/7. And all the Mefarshim there say, like, Kimilta zrutasahi, like it's a small thing, like Moshe saying, oh, what's the big deal? Just do this. So the Gemara says, well, maybe for Moshe it's a small thing, but he doesn't understand, like that's all you need to do. But yeah, I don't think it's a great answer. But I think that, I think maybe, what does it mean? Moshe's so disconnected that he doesn't realize how much greater he is than everyone else. But maybe the answer is no, he really doesn't, because he's so humble.
Right,
he's Ishan Nav Mikol Adam. So he really doesn't understand it. But I think there's a more profound answer, which Rabbi Yosef Abel talks about this in Sefer Ikarim, that the idea that what does Hashem ask of you doesn't mean that it's a small thing, that it doesn't take effort. But the last two words of the pasuk is L'tov lach. Ultimately, it's good for you. It's like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, like you have high blood pressure, you're 30 pounds overweight. All you need to do is lose weight, eat healthy, exercise daily. That's all. It's good for you. And then you walk out, you're like, what do you mean that's all? It's so hard to do all these things. That's everything. But at the same time, like, there are things that you can do that will lead you to a much healthier existence and add years to your life, so you could enjoy it more and have more energy, etc. So I think that's what Moshe is telling us. And that's, what does Hashem ask of you? Well, and then of course, Rashi says there, that shows that's, Hakol b'dei shamayim chutz mirat shamayim. What do you mean? Hashem al-kacha shoel mimcha. Everything is in Hashem's hands except for our relationship with Him. So I think we have to talk about the fact that this is why we're doing this. It's about having a relationship with your Creator, and ultimately, it's litovlach. It's good for you. It's good for us. We want meaning in our lives.
How do you convince like a high schooler of that who doesn't feel that way, doesn't see it that way, doesn't see it as being something good? If anything, sees it as constricting rules.
It's not easy, and it's a lot of siyata dishmaya. But I think it comes back to the relationships. Meaning if you're passionate about it and you're authentically passionate about it, you have to be in Jewish education for the right reasons. I always, when I would bring advisors to some of these programs, I would read them from Rabbeinu Bach's Kara Kemach about Avram Avinu. Like, why was Avram such a successful Kiruv person? Because he was Ohev Hashem and Ohev Abrio. That's where it's coming from. He felt that, the relationship with God and his, recognition of Hashem in a world of polytheism, recognition of Hashem in this world really gave him his life tremendous meaning and simcha. And he loved people so much, and he loved Hashem so much. He wanted people to be able to experience that relationship as well. And I think that if you're genuine about it and the passion comes through and you really believe that Torah, that your relationship with, Torah and with HaKadosh Baruch Hu has really it really impacted your life in a very profound way, I think that message comes across. And you could be,
Would you say that's the same thing for parents?
I think parents also,
can give that over.
I think that parents can do that also. I think the other part of the relationship, by the way, is not just, teaching by example, but also the unconditional love, and students, like kids. I mean, students are kids, but the same way they want to be respected and loved by their parents, they want to be respected and loved by their teachers. And part of why I'm doing this is because I never really felt that someone, like I wanted a teacher like me. I don't mean that as a pet. Like I really, really am connected to my students. And I see that, educators today.
In that same commentator article I was referencing before, you had a couple of students who wrote about how much of a relationship they had with you and how special, you really listened, and it's incredible to really, clearly you did that. And it's very special.
I learn a lot from my students. My students have added tremendous meaning to my life.
Wow.
Sitting at my Shabbos table and not just the Mechina students, all my students, but definitely, when you're seeing someone experience Torah and experience Judaism the way I experienced that a long time ago in Russia, but sitting at my Shabbos table, I remember at one point I had one of my Mechina students. I've had a lot of students over the years for Shabbatot, and that's very important also to be able to bond like that. I come to Stern for Shabbos, spend Shabbos with my students, but I had a student sitting here, and one of my sons was maybe 9 years old at the time, and he gave his Dvar Torah at the table, because we always had the kids give Dvar Torah at the table, and the one that the Rebbe gave them that maybe you understood, maybe you didn't, but then you get the check off and you get like a prize because you gave the Dvar Torah at the table. You know what I'm saying? And he gave the Dvar Torah. And we were ready to go on to the next kid. Okay, what's your Dvar Torah? And he finished, and we were about to move on. And my student looked at him and she's like, do you know how lucky you are that you have the opportunity to learn Torah and to get a Dvar Torah like this, to be able to give over at your Shabbos table.
Wow.
And it never crossed my 9-year-old son's mind that like this was a lucky thing that he was privileged to do.
That's
so
cool. That's also cool that your children grew up with that experience.
My children grew up with it and they experienced it. Cool. And I'm so grateful to my students for giving my kids an appreciation in such a deep way. So I think that, both parents and teachers, I think, have to teach by example for sure. Kids see right through you, if it's not authentic, if it's not authentic, totally. If you're not doing this for the right reasons, if you don't feel it, if you don't, incorporate it and internalize it, it's dvarim hayotzi min halev nichnasim el halev. And I think, things that come from the heart go into the heart. And I think also a very important thing for parents and teachers is that, you have to be mechanech al pi darko, mechanech lanar al pi darko. And the rest of the pasuk says, because that's when they'll stay connected. As they get older, they'll stay connected. That's what the pasuk in Mishlei says. So I think so many times, and I'm a parent also, I've done this, so many times, parents and teachers try to, just, it's a one size fits all, or tries to fit their kids into something that they want. And the kids feel like the relationship is conditional, based on the parents' agenda or the teacher's agenda, or the teacher's agenda. And if, you'll respect me and love me if I do, turn out the way you want me to. And I think it's not one size fits all. And I think we've gotten much better than that. We've gotten much better in Jewish education in terms of that. But I think that's something that we still need to work on, and we have to, I think that's why the schools in Israel are also a little more successful sometimes. And maybe it's, it's easier because you don't have to focus on grades and you don't have to focus on tests, and, you could learn at your own pace. But I think we really have to really be mechanech people al pi darkam, and we talk about this a lot, but I think we have to be able to really,
So obviously Stern is very focused on, as your involvement in both Mechina, the GPATs, in the academic, the Torah, all of that. But I'm sure they're also very focused on, preparing women for their next, their next stage, for their role in, post college, to be able to be involved in society in a meaningful way. I'm curious, what, if anything, does Stern do to prepare the students, prepare the girls to go on to be ready for that aspect of chinuch in their lives, meaning of being a parent?
So first of all, the learning, when I said before, we try to help the women, our students maximize their personal, spiritual, and religious growth. That's just going to help you be mechanech your children also. I mean, Steve Plato once said, I heard him speaking at a dinner once, and he said, just so I want to quote where, the person that I heard from the first time, he said, when you educate, and I think about this a lot, when you educate a boy, you educate the boy. When you educate a girl, you educate a family. So I don't mean to, this is just, but there's something to that. Meaning, I don't mean to be sexist in any way, shape, or form, but there's something, generally in our society, like it's, the mothers are spending more time. Again, not always. I don't mean to stereotype, but lemaisa, spending more time, being mechanech their children in terms of doing homework with them, and building, setting the tone for the family. And so I think that, the more Torah we are able to, offer them, and the more they learn and the more they incorporate the values. And that's why, one of the things that we talked about was teaching values. I think we have to teach through values, the lens of values. And I think teaching and learning in that way is very helpful in terms of preparing you to be the person that you want to be, and raise your children with the values that you want them to have. And also we do have shiurim focused on things that are going to help them in the next stage. We have, panels on all different topics, whether it's dating or marriage or relationships. And, we do a lot of that sort of thing also.
Specifically on parenting, or not necessarily?
Parenting also, we do. Okay, cool. Yeah. So we'll have usually, we usually have a couple panels each semester, and each one kind of covers a different topic. And by the way, also in terms of our guests, I was saying about Shabbos, we've made Shabbos really an incredible experience. So we have different guests coming for Shabbos. So we'll have someone who's a parenting expert. We'll have someone who's a cooking expert. We'll have someone, just so people hear different perspectives. And you hear, like you're doing this podcast, people can hear, different people with different perspectives.
Right.
So we try to do that as well. But I think the main thing is, the learning that college, for some people, like you don't think about religious and spiritual growth after seminary. Like seminary, that's it. And the next step is marriage, and we grow with our husbands. Like we believe in maximizing your spiritual and religious growth post-seminary. That during very important years, that these are the years that you're growing and you're learning. I just had someone recently who said to me, it wasn't so recently, it was a little while ago. He said to me, I want to thank you because I think I'm married to my wife because of you. So I said, okay, I'll take credit, but I don't remember setting you up. I don't even know you.
And he said, one of the three,
I know exactly. So he said to me, well, my first date with my wife was after she was in your class, and she had been a student of mine. And he said, I had a date with her right after your class ended, and she was very excited about something that you had learned in class, and she was going on and on to me and explaining to me. And that first date, I was thinking, wow, she's so passionate about Torah. Like I want to continue a relationship with her.
That's so cool.
So he's like, thank you for that, because that's when I realized I wanted to marry her.
Right.
But I think that's
cool.
also when you teach in this way and you can give material and you're learning Torah in a way that's really applicable to life, then it also helps you. Again, you're teaching values and you're teaching, Torah with real application. So everything helps. Like, in terms of everything in your life, whether it's, your own personal growth, whether, I always tell my students when I teach Bereshit, for example, it's a pattern of human behavior. Why do we care what happened between Chava and the Nachash? Just because it's a good story, why the Ramban in his introduction talks about why we talk about these stories anyway. Why can't we just do mitzvahs? Because we're learning from these stories. Derech Hamunah, he says. But I think, if you couldn't, Adam and Chava, there was one thing they weren't allowed to do, and they did it. So the more we learn and analyze why they did that, the more we can understand for ourselves. Well, we do that all the time, so the more we could learn. So everything we learn, I feel like everything we learn in Torah are things that we can incorporate into our lives, into the important part of our lives, whether it's our own personal growth or the growth and chinuch of our children.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. So, we were talking before how you have this unique perspective because, first of all, you taught in high school and now you teach in college and you oversee a lot of amazing aspects of college. What would you say about the efficacy of our day school system? Or I guess to ask it slightly differently, if there's one thing that you could change about the day school education system, what would it be?
I think what I said before. I think that's...
What would that change be then?
What would that change be in a concrete way?
Yeah, in a concrete
that's
way.
a good question. In a concrete way, talk about HaShem.
Talk about HaShem.
I really believe that.
Have a class.
Again, like not even a class, like everything. It should be pervasive. Like when I gave you the example of the texting, why are we doing this? If you ask any high school kid, why are we learning a million Mefarshim? Why are we doing biblical analysis? I don't know if they realize. And maybe they do, but I don't see that so much, that they realize that we're doing this because we want a relationship with HaShem. I think people are afraid of that because maybe it doesn't mean it's intellectual enough. Everyone's looking for a relationship. People are looking, people are searching, people want to connect. And sometimes they'll find other things to connect with. And if we don't help them connect, it's really, it's a problem nowadays. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein wrote about this. He said that in Mevakshe Tanakh, I think he said, in the olden days, like if somebody didn't learn so well, so they were an Am Haaretz, but they stayed within the community. But nowadays, if someone doesn't learn so well and they don't stay within the rigid, vision of what we see as learning, we lose them. And I think that's, no matter what level you are intellectually, and sometimes it's the people who are most intellectual that need this also. Like I said, if we had learned it more when I was in high school this way, I think more people would be more connected now, to Am Yisrael, Torah, Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and mostly HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I think that's no matter where, some people, they're not good at language. It's hard for them to learn a Daf Gemara. It's hard for them to learn through Mefarshim.
But to connect with it in a real way.
And I feel like we kill them in our system.
Right.
And we try, but again, if you show that there's different paths and there's different paths to having a relationship with HaShem, and show them the beauty of Torah without, again, we have to get that balance between teaching skills, which is important to be able to learn,
sure,
but also making sure that they understand what the whole purpose of this in the first place is.
I completely agree with you. So it's interesting because then you have the Mechina program. Is that what you're doing in the Mechina program meaning how much of a focus do you have on skills in the Mechina program versus how much do you focus on telling them what it's all about and connecting them with Hashem?
It's a great question.
Slightly differently, how do you help them connect to Hashem?
Right. It's a great question. We don't just sing Kumsit songs all day. You have to teach them. But at the same time, it's a college level class with very, very bright students.
Interesting.
Who are very, very bright and very intellectually motivated, but they don't have skills.
Class.
Yeah. So it still is an academic class. I'm teaching them Shorashim. It's hard also because you want to teach, I can't teach them the way that a third grade, teacher teaches her class, but at the same time, you need some of those skills. So I'll bring in a lot of other ideas, but not inside. Like I'll bring them really that first class. I'm focusing on Chumash and Rashi. And of course we have to, we definitely cover more, I'm doing what they do in 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th grade, and then I'll introduce Ramban into the next level
also,
class.
College age students are much more, thoughtful.
Exactly.
They're asking a lot more.
Much more mature in terms of their thinking, in terms of their intellectual capabilities, their emotional depth, so they can understand these things. So I bring a lot of other sources. We don't necessarily do them inside as much. Inside, it's really that aspect of Shorashim, that sounds more like similar to our Jewish education system that you were saying like we're killing them with. So how do you but that's part of it. Meaning I want them to identify.
That's the skills.
Right.
So how do you bring
meaning I'm not just, again, we're not saying kumbaya. I'm not just talking about Hashem all day, meaning I'm trying to find a balance between.
Do you have like machshava, philosophy?
We do. We have all those type of classes at CERN. I teach the intro to Bible class, intro to Tanakh.
Okay.
So that's my class. And then there's someone else, Rabbi Lawrence Hadjoff is amazing. You should interview him at some point. He's great. And he teaches like intro to halacha, like introduction to Judaism. So when you come to CERN with no background, you start out with my intro to Tanakh class and his intro to Judaism.
Interesting. Cool.
And again, a lot of the inspiration comes from the connection, the community that we forge.
Cool. That's amazing.
Within that community. We have a community within a community, but I find that is my biggest challenge, like the finding the balance between the skills, because I want them to get skills and I want them to be able to learn, but I also want them to connect and be inspired by what they're learning.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most, I don't know if it might be different for college students, but what would you say is the most unique challenge with regards to, like, I guess slightly different, more veering away from education for a second to more towards parenting with raising children these days?
I thought you were going to say with technology. Technology is a big part of it.
Well,
technology is a big part of it.
Sure.
They have much more access to so many things and not so much, they get easily distracted because you're always looking at things. You're always, like information overload. And that's why Shabbos is so important. That's why my Mechina students, by the way, get so connected to Shabbos.
Right.
Because it's,
we all need it. We need that. We need that break.
Right. On so many levels. But the whole world is talking about how do we try to get people to disconnect for 10 minutes a day.
Right.
And, we do this every week for 25 hours. So that's very inspiring. But I think the biggest challenge, is probably twofold. I think technology is a big part of it. I know that's redundant. I mean, I'm sure people say this all the time.
That's probably the most classic answer. But
I know, but I also think technology is very important
to deal with it. Right.
But I think that, I'll tell you something. It was something that my boys went to Yeshiva Dar Chenom in Muncie for elementary school. And the Menahel at the time was somebody, Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz. He's somebody else that you should for sure, interview. And he said something amazing. I felt so proud to be part of that school. It was a time that all the schools in Muncie were getting together and like banning the internet and banning technology. And they were having parents, sign something saying we're not going to let our kids have technology, internet, even though they all were. And it was, and Rabbi Horowitz didn't join the crew. He didn't join the group.
Well, he always did his own
thing for sure. And that's why I love, I've such a heart to talk to that school.
Yeah.
But he said something. He said, it's like if a diabetic goes to a wedding. So the diabetic might not want to go to the wedding because there's going to be a Viennese table. It's going to be all these desserts. It's going to be all these things that could, really harm him. So one approach is, I'm not going to go to the wedding. I'm not going to go to the wedding. And then I don't have to worry about all this stuff. The other approach is eat before. Fill yourself up before. So you go full and then you can enjoy all the parts of the wedding and be Mesameh Chasen V'Kala. So that really left a very strong impression on me. Like, that's what we have to do with our kids. Like, yes, you could see what's out there, and you're going to see what's out there, and everybody's exposed to everything. Fill them up with the good parts of what we have to offer. And then they'll get the best of what everything else has to offer without being, really enticed away from it. And I think the other thing is another challenge is, it's also a good thing. It's also bracha that, I guess the wealth, the entitlements, affluenza as opposed to influenza. And I think that's also, it's a good thing that we're in such a good place. Look at the people that were inspired in coming to full circle in communist Russia because they didn't have anything. But
it's a lot. It's a lot. The as it's being termed now, the Gvir culture, right?
I didn't hear that term, but affluenza, I heard.
Yeah.
But the Gvir culture, exactly. So I think that's a problem when people have so much. And thank God, there aren't so many. I mean, I was about to say there's not so many problems in the Jewish community. The biggest problem is that people are leaving the Jewish community.
Right. It's interesting because I was talking to my students the other day about davening, and I said, everyone has something. Everyone has something that they need or want, and my students like, I have everything.
Exactly.
I have literally everything I could ever need or want.
Which is beautiful, but then
it's beautiful to have that, but it is so much harder for them to then really, in a real, genuine way, feel any dependency on Hashem, which is what tefillah is all about, which is what Avodas Hashem is all about. So how can you, it's so hard, like you're saying, when they're coming from that, it's really
and that's why it's value-based learning. You have to teach about Hakaras HaTov. You have to teach it, and Rashi teaches us about Hakaras HaTov. Right. In one of the very first Rashis of Rashi.
Parsha,
Right, 100%. Oh, there you go. Exactly. The Makos.
Yeah,
exactly.
So how do you handle tough conversations in chinuch, whether with your children, with students? What's your approach to that?
So again, it's not in a vacuum.
Right.
You don't have tough conversations in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relationship. It's all about a relationship. My husband is a director of a big behavioral health clinic in Muncie, and he speaks a lot about talking to your kids about sensitive subjects, basically talking to them about, all different sorts of sensitive topics. And he says this all the time, like, people are so panicked, like, how am I going to talk to my kids about sex? Or how am I going to talk to my kids about this? It's not in a vacuum. There's a relationship. Sure. And if there's an authentic, genuine relationship, and the kid, your child or your student feels genuinely cared about and loved unconditionally, then, and you're authentic and you're talking from the heart, and dvarim hayotzi min halev nichnasim el halev, then even difficult conversations can happen in a positive way.
Right.
And
so you're saying parenting it's all about that relationship.
It's
all about the relationship.
Teaching is all about the relationship also.
It's true.
I mean, it's not all. You need to,
so then
be smart about it also.
How do you balance, if the relationship is so important, 100%, how do you balance that with having certain, with whether discipline or having, things that you need to stand for in the home? How can parents balance that in a way where, because you're right, 100%, you have to have that relationship, but you also don't want to be a pushover.
A free-for-all.
You want,
100%.
So
So it's again, hayamin mekarevet v'asmol dochak. You have to, you bring closer with the stronger right arm. I don't, no offense to any lefties out there, but Mishle, the stronger arm is the right arm. So you bring closer with your right arm and you push away with your left arm. It just, you do have to do the discipline. You do have to have these difficult conversations. And there are times that you have to make difficult decisions and your kids are not going to be happy about it. But again, it's not in a vacuum. If you're pulling them closer with the stronger hands, then that's always, then that's always going to be the foundation. Now, again, I'm making it sound so easy. Of course it's not. And I'm a parent. It's not for me either. I don't have, it hasn't, raising, right. I've had Sarah Gidel Banim also. Sure. Like we all have that.
We all have it.
Thank God my kids are great, but like we've all had it. But I think, I know my husband talks about this a lot also. It's about, withdrawals and deposits. You can't, meaning you can't withdraw more than you deposit. You have to deposit more than you withdraw. So when you have opportunities or situations that you have to, be critical or discipline or, those are withdrawals. But you have to have deposits in the bank in order to make those withdrawals.
Interesting.
So that's why I think it's a lot about the relationship.
That's great. That's an awesome mashal. So how do you go about developing that relationship with your children? What does that look like for you? Meaning, I'm saying over all the years. It's a hard question, but it's interesting to think about because you're so knowledgeable, so obvious, and you're a master educator. How do you I guess to ask it slightly differently, are there things that you've learned over your years as an educator that you've brought into your home to then use
Right.
towards?
It's a good question. I mean, we definitely have like well, people say to me like, oh, you're so lucky you have a chinuch home, because you're in chinuch, but in chinuch, you have a chinuch home. Anyone can have a chinuch home. Every home is a chinuch home. So I think
So how can parents make that?
I think it's important. The same way we're teaching values in a classroom, we're teaching values at home. We start our Shabbos table. After we make hamotzi, the first thing we say at our Shabbos table, we go around the table. We've been doing this since the kids were little. Tell me something nice, good, or interesting, or something that you have hakaras hatov for that happened this week. And then my husband added a couple of years ago, or something that expresses your values as they got a little older. Something that expresses your values. Something that you did this week that expresses your values.
Interesting. We do every night at dinner. We do sweet and sour. What was something sweet in your day? What was
That's
something
so
sour?
nice.
And what do you want to say hakaras hatov? What do you want to say thank you to Hashem for? That's I like
that's
that.
beautiful.
That added, added.
I'm already impressed that you sit down for dinner every night and you're able to do this. You'll see as the kids get older. I don't know how old your kids are because everybody's running, but Baruch Hashem, that's why we have Shabbos. So that's what we do, and we talk about it, like how to express your values and
nice.
How do you show, hakaras hatov. So again, it's teaching values. It's making sure your kids know that you love them unconditionally, even if they're not exactly the way you had envisioned them to be.
It's so hard.
It's
so hard for parents to do.
It is hard.
How do parents create that?
I feel very grateful, and I think it's a lot of siyata d'ishmaya, a lot of tefillah. I don't know. I have older kids, and I feel very blessed. I don't even know. I mean, there are wonderful people who are amazing mechanchim who teach amazing values who struggle, and their kids don't necessarily incorporate them. So I don't have the answers to that. Yeah. I don't know. I feel lucky and blessed and grateful, and I don't, I don't know. I don't have good advice to give people because there are wonderful people that are struggling with their kids. And I just feel like hopefully, it'll get easier, and hopefully, like I said, I think, in Dvarim, when HaShem, one of my favorite parts of Dvarim is, when Moshe tells Bnei Yisrael, basically, I mean, I'm not giving another whole shir again, but, he says basically, give it kitolid banim, you're gonna have children and they're gonna go off the derech and they're gonna leave and they're gonna go follow other things that they're gonna, be attracted to in the world. But at the end of the day, bikashta misham et Hashem umatzatem. Like if you, at some point, they're gonna come back and they're gonna come back and look for Hashem and they're going to find Hashem because he's going to be waiting there all along for them. And I feel like that's the relationship is the parents are just, the kid knows that the parents are there for them no matter what. At some points, bikashta misham et Hashem umatzatem. That even from that place, misham, the Mefarshim say, whatever place you're at, if you search for Hashem, you'll find him. And I feel like if kids know that about their parents, and again, it starts from the very beginning of raising children, then hopefully the relationship will remain right no matter what you go through.
That goes back to what you're saying, the unconditional love. That's it. That goes back to that. Tefillah is another thing that's very challenging for everyone, but specifically, it's interesting. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on how parents can make tefillah a little more accessible for their children, or not necessarily make it accessible, but how can they help their children to get to a place where they're connected with tefillah? I mean, obviously, it goes a little bit back to what we were talking about before about connecting with Hashem, but specifically tefillah, it's really hard, really, really challenging.
It is hard. It is hard. It's so funny. I wrote this whole article on tefillah and spirituality. I'm not going to go into that whole thing now, but maybe I'll send it to you after.
I would love to. Please.
Another time.
Yeah.
I think that's another whole discussion, but I think it goes back to the relationship. And I think that's...
meaning you think if parents have a relationship...
No, I think it goes back to teaching that the reason we do all this is because we have a relationship with Hashem. And it's teaching values. It's teaching values of hakaras hatov. Like, I think that...
You think that's something that parents specifically should be explicitly saying, like in their homes? Or, because parents don't have the same role as teachers. Obviously, we're educating our children in a different way in our homes through experience.
Right.
So how do parents give that over, that idea of the relationship with Hashem? How is that so? It's pervasive in everything we do, but how do they?
Right. I think also, it's teaching by example. You see your parents busy with tefillah, and tefillah is important to them, so it'll be important to you. If it's not important to you, it's not going to be important to your kids. Everything is like that, by the way.
Yeah.
In terms of Shmiras HaMitzvos in general.
Yeah, for sure.
I had a very good friend who taught. He was the principal of one of the modern Orthodox school, and he would stand outside and greet his students, coming into school every day. And one girl came out of her car and she didn't, look the way that she should have looked walking into school. And he said, "Good morning." And the father jumped out of the car and he said, "Rabbi, you're going to let her walk into school dressed like that?"
Wow.
It's like,
really?
You let her get in your car. It's like, you can't expect the educator to, educate, and then there's no education at home.
So how do you think schools and parents can
So I think we have to work
partnership?
together. I think it's a tremendous partnership.
This
is why also when my husband speaks about speaking to your kids about sensitive topics, even when things come up in Tanakh that are, sexual topics or sensitive topics, difficult topics to teach, I want to teach them knowing that the parents have had these conversations with their kids. Like, it's not my job to.
Do you think that happens?
No, I think we have to do that more.
So how do we have to have these create that partnership with parents to help?
I think schools should bring in parents and teachers to have these conversations,
Interesting.
Like my husband, when he talks
Meaning
with
more, you're saying more parents programs,
more parent programming, more.
But I feel like parents don't end up coming to those things.
Right. So I was going to say, parents don't come to that. They should, but somehow have the parents take more ownership of it. Like, not just, they're coming and they're hearing a parenting lecture, but more like workshops. I would do more workshop type style learning.
What about those parents? Because
the parents that don't.
The parents
that do are the ones that are going to have more success. I know. I don't know. Some schools have done it so that you have to. That's part of, do some sort of workshop. That's part of, or give a little tuition break if you come, there you go. You solve the problem of tuition and education.
That's a great move
some sort of carrot, some sort of incentive.
Right. Interesting.
I know my kids go to MTA. There are certain parenting things that you have to be at one of them, and that's just, you have to be at one of them or your kid can't stay in the school. I mean, I don't mean to be it like that, but I'm saying it's just, it's not negotiable.
Right. For sure. You started the Mechina program 17 years ago. It's a very, very long time ago, and education and the world has changed so much since then. Has your approach in chinuch changed over that time? And if yes, in what ways?
In the most profound ways, no. Because it's
always been about Torah.
It's all about relationship. It's all about relationship. It's all about genuine relationship. It's all about making Torah meaningful and applicable.
But are you finding that students are more and more apathetic and therefore not necessarily always as open to that relationship?
Again, not my Mechina students, because they're making a very proactive decision to be there. So they're coming, and that's why they're so inspiring. I have my Mechina students. I set up my Mechina students with my more advanced students, bechavrusa, so they could learn together. And it's the kind of situation that it's a zen and nev, zen and nev. It's not like they're, I had a Mechina panel on one Shabbaton we had on campus. And there were 200 students there. Almost everybody had come from, besides from Mechina students, besides for the panelists had come from, strong Jewish educational backgrounds, yeshiva day schools, high schools. And I had one girl look at everybody and say, I see when you talk about you're in the bubble, you roll your eyes like I'm in the bubble. She's like, I just want to tell you, coming from outside the bubble into the bubble for the first time in my life, bubble's beautiful.
Yeah.
It was this
That's awesome.
moment. So
That's
I think
really
so I think, yes, there is more apathy. But at the end, but I also think that the more technology there is and the more superficiality in the world, the more people are looking for a deeper relationship and more meaningful relationships. I mean, look at all the people who are on Oprah Winfrey's couch looking for true meaning in life. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And we have it. And that's why, when Moshe says, it's like almost this urgency, like, what is Hashem asking of you? We have a 613 step, 13 step recipe for meaningful existence. Like, take advantage of it. And I think if we teach it in that way, instead of the negative stuff, and you teach it positively, b'simcha, even the negative things, and don't pretend, like, I feel like sometimes, we teach things like that we expect our students to internalize when it's not real, but it's like the religious answer. When I teach Avram arguing with Hashem about stone, we just always, say the religious line, everything Hashem does is good. And I'm not saying Hashem that it's not, but at the same time, when Hashem tells Avram he's going to destroy Sodom, and Avram's yelling like, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, like the judge of the world is not doing justice. Like not, there are difficult things, and we don't always see.
Right.
There's
don't shield them from it.
Right,
Be
correct.
real,
like
be
real. Again, it comes down to the relationship, and be real and be genuine. And yes, there are things I struggle with. Not everything. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid.
Right.
Like Torah has given me tremendous meaning in my life. There are things I struggle with. There are things that are difficult. Talk to your students about it. Don't be scared to talk to your students about it.
Right.
And have that vulnerability. Exactly. Yeah. Have that vulnerability, because that's going to go a long way. And it's real. It's not like a made up vulnerability. And I say to my students all the time, very often it's the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like there are things that I don't understand, and things that I have difficulty with, and things that we struggle with. And again, if we didn't struggle, we wouldn't be growing. That's where growth comes from. So I think, so when you ask me if things change or innovate, can we change things? Can we be more technologically savvy, to be able to keep up with what the kids are doing? Yes. Can we be creative with programming and, use modern culture more to be able to, connect our students? Yes, absolutely. But the core of the matter, which is the relationship and the genuineness and the authenticity, that hasn't changed.
Right. That's a constant for sure. Wow. As we wrap up, I'm curious if you have any books or svarim on education or parenting that you'd like to recommend to our listeners, or if you want to think about that, any final message that you would like to give over to our
I think there are a lot of nice books. I don't generally like to recommend Blessings of a Skin Knees, something that I think a lot of people are inspired by, but there are different people, different books speak to different people, and I don't like, there are some things that I've read that I wasn't so inspired by, and other people love, and other things that I've read that I'm like, oh, this speaks to me. And what's Svarim, and I think it's bits and pieces. Sefer Mishlei.
Nice.
Sefer Mishlei, hands down.
I hear it.
In terms of really, every sort of thing in life. That's
awesome. That's great.
And messages and really touches on so many things that we can learn from that. That's such an example of ancient knowledge that we can apply today. I tell my students a lot. I've told my students, when we put away the Sefer Torah, we say we should, Eitz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba, that it's a tree of life. If we hold on to Torah, it gives us life. And then we end the paragraph with Chadesh Amenu Kikedem. Ever think about that? Like, it seems very strange. You're machadesh things, you're making things new, Kikedem, like they were. So like, how you make things new if they're like what they were? And I really think that that's our challenge. How are we? One of the mottos of YU is deeply rooted, forward focused. But that's the answer. Meaning, how do we want to stay rooted, but we want to make sure that we're machadish things without letting go of what we're rooted in. And I think that's a very, very important message, and something that, we have to give over in a meaningful way.
It's amazing. Well, it's so clear how passionate you are about Torah and the relationships. And it's incredible. The work that you've done, and, I'm happy that you went on that Russia trip all those years ago, because otherwise, thousands of people would have not been changed the way that they are today. And really, really thank you again.
My pleasure. Can I just say one last thing?
Please.
I realized when you said one last thing.
Please.
I wanted to say, at the end of Sefer Devarim, I'm doing all these shiurim over here, but at the end of Sefer Devarim, because Moshe is basically about to die in Sefer Devarim, and he wants to give over last-minute messages to Bnei Israel to make sure they maintain a relationship with Hashem and maintain a relationship with Torah. And he knows
this is your last-minute message.
This is my last message, right? Last lecture of Moshe Rabbeinu in Devarim. Now all the pressure, like what pasuk? But when we say, and it's one of the most famous psukim in Devarim, but when Moshe says to them, lo b'shamayim hi, right? Like, don't ever think it's inaccessible. And that's the message. It's lo mever hayam, lo b'shamayim hi, lo mever hayam. And the end of the pasuk, karov elacha davar ma'od, because it's really close. Like, don't ever think that you're not intellectual enough, or you're not emotional enough, or you're not spiritual enough, or you're not connective enough. Like, it's always accessible. Torah is always the relationship.
Torah and Hashem,
it's the relationship. Ki karov
to
elacha davar. And in fact, the Mefarshim ask, what do you mean? What does it mean? Ki karov elacha davar ma'od.
Right. A lot of different.
And there's a lot of different explanations. And one of the things that Gemara talks about is like, make time to Torah, like make time to learn, like, and make time to learn in a meaningful way that we understand why we're doing this.
Right.
So that's what it is. It's karov elacha davar ma'od. And I think it's not inaccessible. And we have to make it karov. We have to show and sure our students and our kids know that it's really karov elecha davar ma'od.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Sorry, you're giving like a whole nice
Thank you for
conclusion.
ending off of that. It's beautiful. Thank you for ending off of that. It's amazing. And
Thank
really,
you, Yair.
thank you again.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
This is really enjoyable. We'll have to get another episode at some
Thank you.
point.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Jews Next Door. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to us. Reach out to me at yair@jenoff.org, hi@jenoff.org. You can check us out on the website. You could leave a question there. We'd love to be in touch. Please be in touch. Check us out on Instagram at Parenting the Jews Next Door. Hit me up on Twitter at yairmenshel. And we're on TikTok now too. We have some great content, a lot of really great insights into parenting, tips, parenting pointers, reaction videos, and quotes. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of articles. You want to check it out. Check it out at jenoff.org. You won't be sorry you did. And I look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and share it with your family and friends. Looking forward to another great episode next week.